Hello, I'm Gwen Hill from Pine Ridge Baptist Church Sunday School Department Ladies Class, and we are beginning a study of Daniel. Daniel is set in the year 605 before Christ. It is a book of history and a book of prophecy. It is a very unique book. It is a book you really need to study if you're the least bit interested in end times. And if you want to get a character study of a young man who lived in his whole adult life in captivity and how he obeyed his God and how he clung to the God that he knew, we need to remember who he was and the example that he set for you and for me. It's in the 6th century before the birth of Jesus. Some of the things that were happening in the world about this time was Aesop wrote his fables during this time, and Confucius and Buddha lived during these years. Greek art began to truly excel. Greeks introduced the olive tree to Italy. The Phoenicians made the first known sea journey around Africa during this century, and construction began on the Acropolis in Athens. Mayan civilization flourished in Mexico. Lots of things worldwide was going on during this time. But what we're going to center on and think about is Jerusalem and Israel and Daniel. The book of Daniel was written, I believe, by Daniel himself. And I believe that because in Matthew, Jesus spoke as the prophet Daniel said. So that's enough for me. There's predictions in Daniel that go all the way through the millennium that we studied in Revelation. This man was so blessed of God and was given so many things that would be instructive for you and for me. So let's read the first 2 verses. In the 3rd year, the king of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem, and he besieged it. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasury of his God. Verse 1, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah. Jehoiakim was set in place by the Egyptians when they had conquered Jerusalem. Okay, they had taken the reigning king away and put his brother on the throne, a much more malleable, younger king. He wasn't very effective, and he was the king of Judah at the time. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. It says here he's the king of Babylon. Actually, he's like a co-king. His father was still alive and was still the king when he began the siege. When he had finished the siege, he got news that his dad had died unexpectedly, and he had to leave and rush back to Babylon to claim the crown. It's kind of like us calling King Charles, referring to him when he was Prince Charles, how most of us grew up knowing Prince Charles. We now have to change that into king, so sometimes we'll get the timing wrong. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. Don't get confused. Nebuchadnezzar was an infidel. He was a Gentile king, and he came in and he was successful over Jerusalem for only one reason, and that's because God gave him victory. And why did he do that? Because God had been warning the Jews. They had fallen into idolatry. They were doing things right against God's will for a long time, and he has had enough, and he is now calling them to account, to be accountable for their sins. And God gave Judah into Nebuchadnezzar's hand. And along with that, God gave him some of the vessels from the house of God, from the temple, and he brought them into the land of Shinar. Remember Shinar? Do you remember when we studied Genesis and we talked about Babel, the Tower of Babel? It was built in the valley of Shinar. The Tower of Babel is Babylon, before Babylon became the city of Babylon. So anytime you hear the word Shinar, think Babylon. God gave Nebuchadnezzar access into the treasury of the temple, and he selected vessels to take out of there. You're going to hear more about those vessels a little bit later in the book of Daniel. But he took them, Nebuchadnezzar took them with God's permission out of the temple and into his own little g, God's temple. Okay? He brought them into the treasury of his God. He probably carried those with him in his hurry to get to where his father had just died, to get back to Babylon, and they were put in his treasury, in Nebuchadnezzar's treasury. This was huge. In this day and time, if one army battled another army, the victorious ones in that battle said it was because their God was stronger than your God. Okay? So my victory in any battle was given to the glory of the God of the victors. So Nebuchadnezzar says, by taking these vessels out of the temple, he is telling the Israelites, and he's telling his own people, look, our God is stronger than the Israeli God. If our God wasn't stronger, we wouldn't be able to get these vessels right out of his own house. Look how strong our God is. We are victorious because our God is stronger. What a slap in the face to the Jewish people living in Israel, living in Jerusalem. They worship the one true God, the maker of the universe, the maker of the earth, the beginning and the end, the almighty, the all-powerful, one true God, who had brought them through Egypt and settled them in Israel. And now this God's house had been plundered. How that must have hurt them and confused them. And it was awful for them. In verse 3, we'll read 3 and 4. Okay. Then the king ordered Aspenaz, chief of his officials, to bring some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and of the nobles, youths in whom no defect, who were good-looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, and who had ability for serving in the king's court. And he ordered Aspenaz, to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. Nebuchadnezzar looked over the captives, and he went to one of his trusted servants, Aspenaz, who is chief of the eunuchs. One of the things that is not discussed very much by our commentators when we study the book of Daniel is the fact that Aspenaz was a eunuch, and why he needed to be, in the eyes of Nebuchadnezzar, why he needed to be a eunuch. You see, in that day and time, the king was very, very possessive of his legacy. He was very much thinking about his legacy, and he didn't want his wives to have a child that there was any question about its bloodline. So those men who worked within the castle, who would have contact with his wife, even in the same room with his wife, he would have them castrated, made them into eunuchs. Aspenaz was one of those. So Aspenaz took his assignment, and he went to check over the captives, and he selected out of the nobility and out of the royalty. Well, the royal line in Israel follows which tribe? Do you remember? Judah, the tribe of Judah. Guess which tribe Daniel is in? Tribe of Judah. Okay, so he went and he picked, and among the ones he picked, not the only ones, but among the ones he picked, was Daniel and 3 of his friends. Now, let me read this again to you, and you picture Daniel and his 3 friends to get a description, a physical description of these young men. Youth in whom there was no defect. That means they didn't have a problem with their walk. They didn't have too large a nose, too small a nose. Their features were very comely. They were very attractive to look at. They were built in the accepted fashion at that time. We would want them to be very athletic looking. They had a sparkle in their eyes. They were quick to understand. They were able to take direction well. Remember, they had marched 900 miles to where Aspenaz was. So during that time, I'm sure Aspenaz talked to their captors. Who would you think was the cream of the crop here in this group? I'm sure as he looked at them, that boy with the cross eye, no, don't want him. That boy, he's way too short. No, I don't want him. That boy, he's way too tall. No, I don't want him. He would want young men who were exemplary, who held themselves with good posture, who were very attentive. He would listen to what the captors said. He would say, well, that one, he asks a lot of questions, and they're all relevant. That one, he obeys us and questions us if we have any problem. That one, he has picked up our language very well over the days that we have traveled these 900 miles. That one, he has a lot of stamina. We weren't held up any with him. He was able to keep up and was very helpful to his fellow captives. There was a lot of positives that the guards would see that they probably shared with Aspenaz. And then Aspenaz probably had an interview with each one to assess where they were in their schooling, to assess where they were in their leadership, to assess those personality traits that they may have that would make them people that would work in a team or work together or work solo but be responsive and accountable. And what he saw was good-looking young men who showed intelligence in every branch of wisdom. Aspenaz didn't just walk by their tent and say, I choose you. No, this could mean his life. He needed to choose well because he was choosing for the emperor. And remember, the emperor was all-powerful in his nation, in his empire. So Aspenaz would have wanted to please the king. He also said, I want them to be endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge. He may have given them some practical tests to see how they thought and how they planned and what was going on inside their head. Okay? I'm sure as he talked to the guards, which I'm convinced that he did, the guards would say, that one really picked up our language fast. He's already speaking it like a native, and it's only been a few weeks. And the other one could say, doesn't take him long to catch on. He's going about his duties that we have set for him. He fully understands what is expected of him, and he does a good job. And then he also would probably have heard from some of those, that one's not worth the hype. Yeah, he come from the great noble family of XYZ, but he's dumb as a bag of rocks. Aspenaz says, well, I don't want him. So he also was looking, these men are going to be standing At the end of their training, they're going to be standing in front of the king. Are they going to make Aspenaz look good? Or are they going to embarrass Aspenaz? The king also ordered them to teach. Nebuchadnezzar ordered Aspenaz to teach them, the captives, the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. That's number 4. Who are the Chaldeans? Chaldeans originally were people who lived in the area of Chaldea. These Chaldeans became known for magicians and sorcery, soothsaying, reading the stars. They were the magicians, wise men, the Chaldeans. They had gained a reputation for that. And they had the language of the Chaldeans. And Aspenaz knew he was going to have to teach them that language. Not only the nouns, verbs, and adverbs, but he was going to have to teach them how to bargain, how to plan, how to get their messages across to the Chaldeans, and to be able to understand the Chaldeans' rules. Verse 5, the king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choice food and from the wine which he drank, and appointed that they should be educated for 3 years, at the end of which they were to enter the king's personal service. Okay, that's verse 5. Nebuchadnezzar had a plan on how to indoctrinate these young men into his service, how to brainwash them. Okay? Picture these young men as they go into Babylon, coming from a desert city, hillside city, but still desert. Jerusalem's up on a hill. They didn't have a lot of vegetation, lushness in their area. They've marched through desert sands and mountainous roads for quite some time, and then they come into Babylon. Have you heard about the 7 wonders of the world, of the ancient world? Babylon's Hanging Gardens was one of those. Can you imagine? Have you seen pictures of the gates that led into Babylon? They were huge, and they were gorgeous, and they were blue, up as high as the eye could see. It was blue stone. It looked a lot like enamel, but it was stonework. It was lapis stones, and then above that they had painted the wall, the gates, the same color, so it all looked like it was the same thing. And it was amazing. It was just simply amazing, the beauty. And when they walk through those gates, they're walking into lush vegetation. They're looking into beautiful buildings that are very ornate, beautiful. There would have been the sound of birds. There would have been the sound of industry and people and the arts. And when they got to where they could maybe overlook or see part of the garden, the riot of colors that they would have seen. It was very tempting, and they would have all probably went, wow, when they saw that. Have you ever been to Disneyland or Disney World and you walked up and you first saw Cinderella's castle? If you've been with a child, that child looked at the castle and went, wow, think of these young men. This was a fantastic thing for them to see. It was just amazing. Okay. By the way, when I talked about Daniel, probably was, and the other 3 were probably made eunuchs. It's prophesied in Isaiah 39:7, and they shall take away some of your sons who will descend from you, whom you will beget, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. So, it's legitimate to think that they may have been although Daniel is silent on that part, it would be another reason why Daniel lived his whole lifespan in Babylon and why he chose not to go back to Jerusalem, wouldn't it? Okay. This indoctrination was to start, and as we read in verse 5, the king Nebuchadnezzar chose for them choice foods. He set their diet. Nebuchadnezzar knew, I've already invaded their vision, what they're seeing, their sense of sight. Now I want to invade their sense of taste and of smell. I want to expose these young men who's been walking across the desert for 900 miles to get here with wonderful food. I want them to think that Babylon is the best place in the world to be. So he set an invitation to them to partake from his table. Doesn't mean they ate with him. It means they ate or were offered to eat the exact same things that was on the king's table. So he had the choicest of food. He's king, remember? He had the choicest food and the choicest wines. And he agreed that all the men that Aspenaz picked out, that they would share his table for the length of time that they would be in their studies, which would be for 3 years. 3 years. And at the end of that 3 years, at the end of their studies, by the way, these young men would be anywhere from 15 to 20. For my study, in my head, I'm thinking of them as a 17-year-old young man, okay? So they would be 3 years in their studies. And after the end of that, they would enter into the king's personal service. Close to the king, close to the throne. These young men have been picked for their intellect. They've been picked for their physique. They've been picked for their abilities. And they are going to be trained to use those because they're going to be first-hand partners working together for the king of Babylon. The emperor of the world, he had conquered most of the known world at this time. So this was a big deal. This was a great big deal. So we are introduced to the names of the young men that we're studying in the next verses in 6 and 7. Aspenaz, these are the young men that Aspenaz chose. Then the commander of the officials assigned new names to them. It's another part of indoctrination. It's another part of brainwashing, wanting you to forget who you were, to begin thinking that your life started the day you walked through those gates in Babylon. We're going to change your names. We're going to wipe away who you think you were and give you new names. Now among them were the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. These 4 young men were very close, and we'll see that closeness as the story progresses. Then the commander, the Babylonian commander of the officials, assigned new names to them. To Daniel, he assigned the name Belshazzar, and to Hananiah, Shadrach, and to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. So he gives them new names, hoping that every one of their names had a name that denoted something positive about their God. And now they're giving names that are going to glorify and amplify the little g God of Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, Daniel meant God is my judge, and it was changed to Belshazzar, meaning Baal's prince. Baal was the God, little g, God's name. Hananiah means beloved by the Lord, and it was changed to Shadrach, meaning illumined by by the sun god. See how they're changing not only their names, but what their names, the glory of their names. They were named for their one true God. Mishael means who is as God, was changed to Meshach, which means who is like Shach, who some believe was the Babylonian goddess that was very similar to Venus. The name Azariah means the Lord is my help. And it was changed to Abednego, means servant of Nego. One of the strongest ways to indoctrinate someone was to change their names, to make them forget the old and assimilate the new. But Daniel, let's read verse 8. But Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials, that he might not defile himself. Why did Daniel choose to rebel over food? That seems like such a much smaller thing than changing his name. But he didn't rebel at that. You see, Daniel knew who he was, and he knew who his God was. And changing his name would make any difference. But you know what? There was a commandment from God about what he ate. And he knew these foods that were being served were not made in a kosher way, under the approval of God, blessed by a priest, by a Jewish rabbi. It wasn't. A lot of these meats, the animal was killed, but they weren't blooded, so the blood stayed in the meat. That was the way that most places cooked their meat in that time. So that made that meat unclean. Even if something looked clean to them, they didn't know how it was prepared. And rather than take a chance, they refused it. Give us vegetables and water. You're going to see that coming up. So he went to the commander of the officials, over the guards, over his teachers. And the theory is that he explained, I can't eat this. This would defile me in front of my God, and I can't. You've changed my name, but I know who I am. What you call me is not important. That won't offend my God. But this food and this drink will make me unclean in front of my God. And I can't. I can't. He didn't threaten a hunger strike. He didn't get belligerent and in their face. He explained to them. In verse 9, it says, Now God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander of the officials. And the commander of the officials said to Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king, who has appointed your food and your drink. For why should he see your faces looking more haggard than the youths who are your own age? Then you would make me forfeit my head to the king. He said, Daniel, while I understand what you're saying, you're asking me to take a terrible risk. This could mean my life. If you're called before Nebuchadnezzar, King Nebuchadnezzar, and he sees you looking less than robustly healthy, he was going to blame me for that, and it can cost me my life. So Daniel said to the overseer, whom the commander of the officials had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, that's verse 11. So notice what Daniel did. Daniel didn't press the point anymore with the commander. He went one step lower. he went to the man who was immediately over him and his friends and put his petition to him again and explained to him the importance, and listen to how wise this 17-year-old boy was. Then Daniel said to the overseer, whom the commander of the officials had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days, and let us be given some vegetables to eat and water to drink, and then let our appearance be observed in your presence, and the appearance of the youths who are eating the king's choice food, and deal with your servants according to what you see. He's logical. He's calm. He's giving a workable compromise. He's saying, we're going to be in class. We are going to be studying under you for 3 years. That's over 1,000 days. What are 10 days? 10 days that are early on. The first couple of weeks that you have us in training. What is that 10 days going to matter overall? But to address your concerns, water to drink, and the word that is said for vegetables also included grains in that language. This is Hebrew. It's also included grains. So they had grains to eat, they had vegetables to eat, they had water to drink. He said, give us that for 10 days. Don't change the rest of the guys' meals. I'm not pleading for them. I'm pleading for me and for my 3 friends. The 4 of us want you to put us to the test for 10 days. It made sense. It made sense. So in verse 14 it said, so he listened to them in this manner, and he tested them for 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, their appearance seemed better, and they were fatter than all the youths who had been eating the king's choice food. So the overseer continued to withhold their choice food and the wine that they were to drink, and kept giving them the vegetables. So 10 days. 10 days, Daniel, Azariah, and the other 2, Hananiah and Mishael, they when it came time to eat, they were giving vegetables and grains and water to drink. I can see them really enjoying themselves. And the same stuff, plus all of the king's fare, was given to the other captive young men. Can you imagine the joking and the ribbing that these 4 took from the others as they drank the wine and became less inhibited after drinking the wine and eating the king's food? Says, you need to eat what we're eating. It is delicious. You're in Babylon. You're not in Jerusalem where your mom or your dad would correct you. You're in Babylon. Do as the Babylons do. How many times have you heard the story or the saying, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas? Have you said it yourself? Can you hear these boys saying that to Daniel and his friends? Remember where you're at, Daniel. What happens in Babylon stays in Babylon. Eat, drink, and be merry. And Daniel and his friends, no. And after 10 days, let me share a little something with you. Even today in that culture, because it is a sparse land and living is hard, you don't see a lot of heavy men from that area. And when you do, they are affluent. They are affluent men. The extra weight that they carry is a badge of honor to their families, that this person is a good provider. He has extra. He has excess. He is well-to-do. So when it says after 10 days, their faces were fatter, that's a miracle, people. People don't do that in 10 days on a vegetarian diet. That's a miracle. Did you recognize it as one? God gave their faces fullness, and he gave them a healthy glow, and their guard was impressed. And he said, we'll continue, pass the test. Okay. And I'm sure throughout the 3 years, he kept looking back at those young men and thinking, are they still looking good? Yep, they're still looking good. So God was watching after them all the way. In verse 16 it says, so the overseer continued to withhold their choice of food and the wine they were to drink, and kept giving them vegetables. That's where we're going to stop today. See you next week, and we will start in chapter 1 of Daniel at verse 17. Have a good day. May God bless.